The morning sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the luxurious mansion owned by Alexander Reed, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire from nothing. His life looked perfect from the outside: a sprawling mansion, luxury cars, and a business empire that stretched across cities. But behind all that success, Alexander carried a hollow emptiness that money couldn't fill. His wife had passed away 3 years ago in a tragic car accident, leaving him alone to raise their only son, 5-year-old Noah. Since then, Alexander had buried himself in work, believing that if he worked hard enough, the pain would fade. But it never did. Noah was all he had left, and yet, Alexander was rarely home to even see him smile. Noah's care had been entrusted to the household staff, particularly to the young maid, Elena. She had joined only 6 months ago, quiet and gentle, always wearing a soft smile that somehow brought warmth even to the cold mansion. Everyone liked her: the cook, the driver, even little Noah, who rarely spoke much after his mother's death. But Elena seemed to reach him in ways no one else could. Every night, she read him stories, tucked him in, and made sure he ate properly. Under her care, Noah had started to laugh again. That morning began like any other. Alexander left early for a business meeting, while Elena tidied the nursery, humming softly as Noah played with his blocks. She hadn't been feeling well for days. The long hours, skipped meals, and quiet exhaustion of trying to manage both her job and her personal struggles had begun to take a toll on her body. But she never complained. To her, this job meant survival. Elena's life had been hard long before she stepped into the Reed mansion. She had grown up in a poor neighborhood, raised by her grandmother after her mother abandoned her. She dreamed of studying nursing one day, but life had other plans. Bills piled up, and she was forced to take whatever work came her way. Becoming a maid wasn't her dream, it was her only choice. Yet she performed every task with dignity, with a quiet strength that impressed even the most cynical of hearts. Around noon, as Noah played near his crib, Elena felt a strange dizziness. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself, but the room began to spin. She whispered Noah's name softly, her voice trembling. The little boy turned, confused. "Miss Elena," he said, his tiny voice full of innocence. But before she could respond, her body gave in. She collapsed to the floor, the bottle in her hand rolling across the carpet. Noah froze for a second, then began to cry. Moments later, the sound of a door opening echoed through the hallway. Alexander had returned earlier than usual, his phone still pressed to his ear as he stepped into the corridor. "Yes, the deal's finalized," he said briskly, walking toward his son's room. But then, silence. The phone slipped from his hand as he saw what lay before him. Elena was sprawled on the floor beside Noah's crib, motionless. The baby's cries filled the room. "Oh my God," Alexander whispered, rushing forward. He knelt beside her, shaking her gently. "Elena, can you hear me?" There was no response. Her skin felt cold. Panic surged through him. "Call an ambulance," he shouted to his security guard outside, his voice breaking with urgency. He lifted her head carefully, trying to feel a pulse. "Please, stay with me," he murmured. The sound of sirens filled the air minutes later as paramedics rushed in. Noah clung to his father's leg, tears streaming down his cheeks. For the first time in years, Alexander felt fear, not the fear of losing money or status, but the fear of losing someone who mattered. The ambulance roared away, and Alexander sat in the hospital waiting room. His mind racing. He didn't know much about Elena. He realized with guilt that despite her working for him for months, he'd never asked about her life. She was just the maid, until now. When the doctor finally came out, Alexander jumped to his feet. "How is she?" he asked. The doctor sighed. "She's stable for now. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, and malnutrition. She fainted because her body simply gave up." Alexander was stunned. Malnutrition. "But she works in my house. She eats with the staff." The doctor gave him a look that said more than words could. "Sometimes, people hide their pain too well. Whoever she is, she hasn't been taking care of herself for a long time." That night, Alexander sat beside her hospital bed, watching the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Her face looked peaceful, yet pale. He noticed the worn-out bracelet on her wrist, the kind you'd buy from a street vendor. There was something about it that tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. When she stirred awake, her first words weren't about herself. "Is Noah okay?" she whispered weakly. Alexander felt a lump rise in his throat. "He's fine," he said softly. "You should worry about yourself." "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." He frowned. "Trouble? You nearly died, Elena." Her eyes filled with tears. "I just didn't want to lose this job. I need it. My grandmother is sick, and the medicine is expensive. I've been sending her everything I earn." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken guilt. He thought about the countless nights he'd ignored his son, the way he treated his employees as shadows in his grand house. Here was a woman who had given her strength, her care, her health, all to care for his child, while suffering in silence. When he returned home that night, he found Noah asleep, clutching Elena's scarf. His small fingers gripped it tightly, as if afraid she'd disappear forever. That simple image broke something inside Alexander. He realized that Elena hadn't just been a maid, she had been the heart of the house. The next morning, he drove back to the hospital with a decision burning in his mind. He asked the nurse for Elena's medical file, and as he flipped through the pages, something caught his eye, a name under emergency contact. Sarah Reed. His breath stopped. Reed. The same surname as his late wife. His hands trembled as he turned the page. It couldn't be a coincidence. He needed answers. When Elena woke up again, he sat beside her, his expression unreadable. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something. Why is my wife's sister listed as your contact?" Her eyes widened in shock. You knew Sarah." "She was my wife," Alexander replied slowly. "Who are you, Elena?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Sarah was my sister too," she whispered. "But she never told you about me, because I was born after our mother remarried. She wanted to protect me from her world. I never thought I'd end up in your house. I just needed work. I didn't mean to hide the truth." Alexander's heart pounded. His son's beloved Maid, the woman who had cared for Noah with such love, was his late wife's half-sister. The truth hit him like lightning. All this time, she had been part of the family he thought he'd lost. As he sat there, speechless, memories of his wife flooded back, her laughter, her compassion, her promise to always look after those she loved. And suddenly, he understood. Fate hadn't brought Elena into his life by accident. It was as if Sarah herself had sent her sister to heal what was broken. Alexander looked at her with newfound respect. "You don't need to work another day in my house as a maid," he said softly. "From now on, you're family." Elena shook her head, still trembling. "Sir, please, I don't need anything. I just want to take care of Noah. He reminds me of her." Alexander's voice broke. "He reminds me of her too." As the first light of dawn touched the hospital window, Alexander knew his life would never be the same. The woman he had once ignored had not only saved his son's spirit but had unknowingly given him back a piece of his lost family. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope.